evening, my goal is to get you to think about an old story in a new way. In fact, the story that I'm going to tell actually begins in 1972 in the fair city of Boulder, Colorado, where researchers Driscoll, Davis, and Lipitz found that couples who reported higher levels of parental interference subsequently showed elevations in love and commitment approximately 8 months later. This effect came to be called the Romeo and Juliet effect. However, since the original study, replications of this effect have been rather elusive, leading some to question whether or not this finding may not be as fictional as its title might suggest. In fact, in over 40 years of conceptual replications, the overwhelming majority of studies have found that it is social network approval, not disapproval, that helps a relationship thrive. This consistent finding has been termed the social network effect. For example, 2 recent meta-analyses have further confirmed the existence of the social network effect. In the first, they found that social network opinions can even be a more powerful predictor of the likelihood of your relationship breaking up than your own personality characteristics or self-esteem. Furthermore, in our own meta-analysis, we also conducted a direct replication where, in consultation with Dr. Driscoll himself, we included the same measures as were employed in the original study in 1972. And yet, even with those same measures, we still found that the higher the levels of social disapproval, the higher the levels of relationship suffering. And lastly, you might recall that things ultimately didn't end up too well for Romeo and Juliet themselves. But this isn't where our story ends. Because it turns out that in our search for Romeo and Juliet, we think we may have stumbled upon what is the true story of modern-day Romeo and Juliets. In that, there are couples today who face social disapproval for a variety of reasons, and yet manage to maintain their relationship despite that disapproval. And so this is their story. And it's a story that I'm going to divide into 3 acts, based on 3 factors that our lab has identified that people typically think of whenever considering both the story and the effect. I'll take each of these in turn, starting with disapproval. Now, no one would deny, I'm not arguing, that Romeo and Juliet face significant levels of social opposition. And today in our surveys, we find that approximately 1/3 of couples report facing some degree of opposition from at least one source within their social network, such as a friend or a family member. What we don't find, however, is that this disapproval strengthens the relationship in any way. Rather, we find that couples actively recruit and manage to find sources of social approval within their network to help confirm their choice, something that Crowley and Fall refer to as support marshalling. Likewise, in our own research, we find that to the extent that individuals, whether it be in survey research or in our experimental research, to the extent that individuals can perceive that they have some level of social support, this can serve as a buffer against the sources and voices of disapproval. Those who can't find social support, however, show significant declines in their relationship quality. And didn't Romeo and Juliet actually have some support? They had the nurse, they had the friar, among others. And I seriously doubt that their story would have been the same without them. The next act I want to tackle is the issue of this perception that Romeo and Juliet's story was one of them defying all odds. That they had a relationship that was forbidden, and because it was forbidden, it just intensified their love for each other. This is something that in psychology we refer to as reactance. Now, reactance occurs whenever we perceive that others are impinging on our ability to make our free and independent decisions. And in response, we do whatever we can to reassert our sense of free will. In our research, we've identified 2 basic types of responses. One is that defiant response, where whenever I feel that I'm being denied something that I want, I respond by pursuing that thing that I want even more ardently. So you tell me that I can't love this person, now I'm falling completely head over heels. On the other hand, we have the independent response. And this is where I might hear the contrary opinions of others, but basically I'm just going to disregard them and keep on with the course of action I had chosen anyway. So you tell me I shouldn't be with somebody, I'm really just going to shrug it off and stay with them anyway. Across a series of studies, my colleagues and I have found that that defiant response really does nothing for couple members trying to maintain their relationship in the face of social disapproval, but independence does, such that individuals who strongly desire to make their own choice about who to love manage to maintain that love regardless of the opinions of others, whereas those low and independent reactants don't. And these findings are not actually inconsistent with the story of Romeo and Juliet, as given they were adolescents, they would fall into this period of development that we refer to as emerging adulthood, where during this stage, youths seek to establish autonomous identities. And contrary to what any parents of a teenager might think, like me, they tend to do this by forging a path that is free and independent of the influence of others, as opposed to choosing a path that actually depends upon doing the opposite of what others suggest. Now we come to our last D, destiny. Now, it may seem rather difficult for us to examine something like destiny in any sort of empirical fashion, but it just so happens that in psychology we have this concept called implicit theories of relationships, which outlines two basic sets of beliefs about how relationships form and endure. On one hand, individuals can believe in growth, where they believe that relationships take work to cultivate, and inevitably over the course of a relationship, you're going to encounter difficulties. But those difficulties can even be opportunities for relationship enhancements. On the other hand, you can have people who believe in destiny, where they perceive that your relationships are either meant to be or they're not, and you can usually tell quickly whether or not this person is that one true love who's going to ignite your fireworks. Now, it's not hard for us to find themes of destiny within a story about star-crossed lovers. But it just so happens that, at least when we aren't dealing with works of fiction, if Romeo and Juliet had endorsed this idea of destiny and they left their relationship to fate, they ultimately would have been more likely to just leave that relationship altogether, because they would have perceived those negative opinions as a sign that their relationship was not meant to be and would have parted ways. Not so for those who believe that relationships take work. And if you reflect on the story, didn't Romeo and Juliet actually work to try and change the opinions of those who opposed them? They did. It didn't work, but at least they tried. And so themes of growth are not actually absent from the story of Romeo and Juliet. They just get overshadowed by our sort of romantic, idealistic focus on destiny. Yet, even in their own words, Romeo and Juliet rejected those fateful stars and defined love as something that, when vexed, could grow through tears. So, where does this leave us? What's the moral of this story now? Clearly, I believe that, according to both the end of the story of Romeo and Juliet and our research, we see that whenever couples face social disapproval, it can foreshadow the demise of their romantic relationship. And in some cases, that might be for the best, as in our research on abusive relationships. Nonetheless, what we hope that our research shows is that, in some cases, for some individuals, you can still maintain love and commitment within a relationship despite, not because of, social network disapproval. And although our research isn't exhaustive in identifying every potential buffer, what I hope the current research highlights is that though social networks can have a powerful influence on the fate of one's romantic relationship, that influence is not fated. Thank you, and thank you to my social network, including my awesome lab, my fantastic co-authors, my very generous funders, my own supportive friends and family, and, and my big sister especially, without whom all of these graphics would not have been possible.